Hello and welcome back. Today we discuss the American Revolution, which started in 1776. The ideas of the Enlightenment that you've learned about in the last lecture incited much discussion among intellectuals throughout Europe and the Americas. However, these ideas did not incite political and social change until English colonists in the Americas decided to break their ties to the British Empire and declare themselves an independent country. The birth of the United States of America represents the first application of Enlightenment thought to government. The U.S. Declaration of Independence and the resulting U.S. Constitution had as its premise the equality of all men and the defense of every individual's right to, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was only a slight departure from the natural rights John Locke had spoken of almost 100 years earlier. I want to start the lecture by asking you a question. In the last lecture, you learned that the Enlightenment thinkers sought to incite change, radical change, in the very structure of government. They argued in favor of removing absolutist rulers and replacing them with a representative government committed to defending the interests of the population. This was the social contract. The question I pose to you then is, do radical ideas automatically result in radical change? In other words, do revolutions happen just because a philosopher or a group of philosophers argue in favor of changing the political structure? The answer is almost certainly no. Just because ideas are appealing doesn't mean that the general population is going to be willing to risk their lives to impose those ideas. You will find today that typically revolutions take place as a result of two factors. Number one, those ideas, and two, a social or political crisis. Without a crisis that will make people feel desperate enough, from starvation to emotional pain or to some sort of suffering, whatever that might be, ideas by themselves are not enough to incite revolutions. You will see this in today's lecture and also when we discuss the French Revolution. In the case of the American colonies, the crisis would come in the form of disputes over commercial policy that led to physical confrontations with British troops. Here you have a painting of George III, the King of England in the late 18th century. At that time, England was the most powerful military and economic power in the world, ahead of France, its most direct competitor. Notice the uniform George is wearing. It is the same bright red that English troops wore at the time, hence their nickname, the Redcoats. So, why would English colonists in America decide to part ways with such a powerful country as England? They were encouraged to declare independence mainly for economic reasons. As a colony of the English Empire, the Americans were required to trade only with England. This restrictive trade policy was known as mercantilism. It ensured the English crown taxation of all American trade. However, the inability to sell their wares on a competitive market kept prices and profits for American colonists low. In addition, the English crown restricted colonial expansion, keeping the western half of the colonies for Native American tribes that had fought for England in the French-American War that ended in 1763. But the most poignant issue for colonists was that the English crown taxed them without giving them political representation in the English Parliament back in London, the body that voted on raising taxes. A series of tax acts, including the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Act, led to public demonstrations against them in the American colonies. The colonists' slogan became "No taxation without representation." Each time, the English government ended up repealing the tax acts, but imposed others in their place. Confrontations with imperial troops grew in intensity in the early 1770s. In December of 1773, a shipload of tea just arrived from England was dumped into Boston Harbor by colonists dressed as Native Americans. The English government reacted by imposing the Intolerable Acts in 1774, strong taxes accompanied by harsh reprimands for those that refused to pay them. Concerned by the growing tensions, representatives of all 13 colonies met in September of 1774 to discuss how to react. The First Continental Congress concluded that the colonies would not back down. They would assert their colonial rights and denounce any and all British violations. As the English tried to force colonists to abide by taxation acts, violent confrontations began to mount. In early 1775, colonist militias named Minutemen engaged English troops in the northeastern towns of Lexington and Concord. The English, who greatly outnumbered the Minutemen, won both battles with ease. However, the Minutemen did not give up and used guerrilla tactics to continue fighting the English troops as they fell back to their garrison in Boston. In July of 1776, the Continental Congress met again, this time to draw up what became the Declaration of Independence, a formal document announcing the colonists' separation from England and its empire. In the document, the colonists justified their separation, citing the social contract and the English crown's refusal to fulfill it. Following Locke's arguments, the colonists felt that they had no other option than to reject the government that did not represent their interests and create another one. The new state was named the United States of America. I thought you might enjoy looking at these two versions of the Declaration of Independence. On the left, you see a rough draft in Thomas Jefferson's handwriting. Notice all the scribbling and crossed out words. On the right is the polished and finished version. Remember this image when you are writing your papers. Going through and editing your text often improves it. Here you see New Yorkers bringing down a statue of King George III close to City Hall after the Proclamation of Independence. You might find some resemblance with images broadcast on TV after the fall of the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq just a few years ago. The War of Independence lasted 6 years. Although the Americans were fighting against a much more formidable enemy, remember that England was the strongest military power of the time, the distance from England and the help of the French, who declared war on the English to help the Americans, played in favor of the young United States. By 1781, the last English troops in the United States surrendered to American General George Washington. David had defeated Goliath, and Enlightenment ideas had defeated traditional monarchical absolutism. But the victory extended further. In the next 40 years, the American Revolution served as an example to the peoples of France and Latin America, who rose up to assert their rights and force radical social and political change. By 1821, most of Latin America was independent of the Spanish Empire. But as we wrap up the lecture, a question remains. Was the American Revolution truly revolutionary? The king was replaced by a representative government based on Locke's concept of equality and the social contract. However, equality in the United States was not all-inclusive. Equality applied to the traditionally privileged groups in society, that is, rich white men. Everyone else, from black African slaves to Native Americans to women, whether black or white, were excluded. As such, while the political structure had changed, society remained largely unchanged. Slavery would last another 90 years, and women would not have the right to vote until 1920. We end our treatment of the American Revolution here. The next lecture will deal with the French Revolution, a much more radical and profound revolutionary movement that shook the foundations of French society to the very core. See you then.